All right, decision making. So decision making and relevant costs, again, in principle, not a difficult topic, all right? Um, I think your biggest success factor here, or keys to success, is again being able to sit in that seat and properly understand and ask yourself what is relevant, what is the relevant cost in this situation. Now, the questions can get tricky. They throw a lot of words, a lot of numbers at you. But there's a few basic rules that override all other rules in short-term decision making and hence relevant costing. All right. Do you really want to miss those two rules, Junior? This is the key part. All right. You need to consistently ask yourself, is this incremental to my decision? A cost that I'm looking at, or income, or whatever it might be. Is it incremental? And is it a cash flow? Right? Being able to sift through all the information and clearly understand within yourself that these aren't accounting style movements or allocations or whatever it might be. It's a true cash flow that happens. All right. So it's a good point to start decision making is one of the key assumptions. And I'm going to ask you guys what you think that assumption might be. Nope. Relevant range? No. Tyler? What's one of the key assumptions underlying short-term decision making? It's kind of natural though. No? Nope. So it's kind of, okay, go for it. Sorry? Future? No? I mean, I know you guys are going with this, but not where I'm going with it. So if you have to let me play a scenario to you guys. You have an opportunity to, you have an opportunity to go out on Friday night, okay? And your buddy phones you and say, hey, listen, let's go out. And that person that you're interested in, that you've been eyeing out, is going to be there wherever we might be going. And a few things go through your mind, okay? First thing is, do I have time? Am I doing anything else? Am I missing out on another date that I actually kind of had lined up? All right. Second thing that goes to your mind is, do I have the money? All right. My bank account's pretty low at the moment, or I've already used whatever kind of pocket money I might have had or allowance. So do I have any cash? And if I don't, I really want to go out on this evening out to see this person, but I don't have money, so that's going to be a problem. And then the other thing is, like, then you're just thinking more contextually, like, crap, I plan to study on Saturday morning. I wanted to wake up at 5 a.m. and, start and crack a awesome session of studying and prepare myself for the tests that are coming up. So there's a whole bunch of contextual things. So you're faced with a short-term decision. There's a bit of financial in this, but there's also there's the quantitative side, but there's a lot of qualitative stuff as well. But on the quantitative side, what is the underlying assumption or like thought process that is going through your mind? Not really. Opportunity cost, not really. It's like a foundation to opportunity cost. Okay, so do I have the money for it? Getting closer. So what if you're thinking, do I have the money for it? What is happening on a deeper level? Okay, very, very close. Is it profitable? Profitable. Okay? My future cash flow effect. Again, very close, but not exactly what so we're honing in on this underlying assumption. No, I think we're stepping slightly further away now. Marketing risks. Does the market exist? If you mean your date, is she interested? That's your potential date. Cost benefit, all right? Cost benefit also very close to that like core underlying value that you're trying to visibility, feasibility. That probably says it um, closely. Yeah, feasibility, profitability. All right. I think you guys are getting close enough. I'm looking for something specific, which it will be impossible for you to come into my mind. But what I'm looking for is in the short term, we are seeking out the best, most profitable situation possible. That's the underlying assumption of short-term decision making. Okay, let that sizzle inside of you. We are seeking out the most profitable outcome in the short term. Now think about it. I know you guys are scratching away. Why is that the underlying assumption of short-term decision making? Like, and if I think about this little scenario we're talking about, when we spoke about the cost side of things, and you said, "Crap, I don't have so much money in my account." Whatever. What you are thinking in the short term was like, what's the best financial outcome for me in this situation? That's kind of the underlying value system that you trying to work through when you're asking yourselves all these questions. Okay, there's the qualitative stuff. Let's put that aside. On the quantitative side, what's the best financial outcome for me in this situation? So if we look at the budget side, your answer to go out on this evening out is most likely no, because you know you're going to spend money that you don't have, and you're not fully happy with that. But that doesn't always make your decision, right? Okay, humans are irrational. But besides being irrational, there's other things we think about. So potential lifelong happiness by going on this date is more important than the price of a dinner, all right? Maybe getting a break before your studies is also a good thing. Maybe going out and having too much drinks is a bad thing and it ruins your path to success in your studies. So that's a non-financial factor that's in the negative, that moves this radar into the negative. And you are in effect, by just trying to make that simple decision, playing out a real life scenario of short-term decision making and relevant costing and all those types of things. Okay, when you go to the restaurant, do you pay with cash or do you pay with do you pass them an accounting entry? Okay, there's an actual cash flow, right? There's something that's happening when you go and pay for that food. Very similar to short-term decision making when we say only cash flows matter. So in the short term, we're thinking, what's the best financial outcome for me? And then we think of the qualitative stuff as well, which can sway the decision strongly depending, all right? Cool. So that's it, right? That's short-term decision making. As long as you can work through that and navigate through that thought process when you're looking at questions, looking at problems posed in front of you, you'll be able to appropriately read through the information and understand. I'm just hoping this is on. And yeah, but this one it is. And understand what you need to be calculating. All right. So obviously in questions is more complex than just one possible meal that you're going to be paying. They start throwing in all types of things. So they're going to say there's some labor that you have to pay for, but the situation around the labor is this, and they give you 3 different things that are happening that kind of just throws you off. But we need to move back to that question about, is it incremental? So try filter out all the type of information that's being thrown at you and ask yourself, what is the incremental part in terms of doing this action? And that's why when you've done this in previous years, they talk about fixed costs are irrelevant. But I've told you, I think even on day one, that's not true necessarily. Okay, fixed costs, as we know, can change. They can move on different activity levels. Based on certain outcomes, you might need to incur new fixed costs based on different decisions, sorry. And hence, fixed costs as a rule are not irrelevant. You're going down a very scary road if you think that's as simple as that. Rather, non-incremental costs are irrelevant. So if we're talking about rent and of an office space or of a factory floor, and there's a certain number of decisions, but that factory floor never changes, the amount of rent you pay for that or the amount of building space that you need, then of course it's irrelevant, that fixed cost. Your salary structure for your employees in your head office and in your management team, not going to change most likely, therefore irrelevant. However, there might be step fixed costs for floor factory workers and the team on the ground, or you might need to put in extra shifts and things like that, and those become incremental and hence start becoming relevant. A dealer. Okay. Variable costs, by nature, they move with output. So that's why in previous years, the rule was variable costs are always relevant. And for the most part, they are, okay? Because when we talk about direct costs as specifically, with each extra output of production or service rendered, your direct costs increase. That's the definition of direct costs, which means they are relevant because it's incremental. Talking cash flows. Only cash flows are relevant, all right? And why just cash flows? Well, because accounting entries don't really impact your pocket, okay? Your accounting entries are going to happen in any case, regardless of whether you undertake that project or not. For example, if I need to buy a new machine for a short-term decision or an extra part, let's just call it a part, all right? But that part has substantial value, 15,000 Rand maybe, and we can use it over 3 years. Do I just take off the depreciation for my decision, or do I consider the whole cost of that part when I'm thinking of the short-term decision? Okay, taxes aside, so you'll take off the whole cost. Because of this decision, you're incurring this new you have to pay for this new part. If I use depreciation, what am I really doing? That's not really the financial impact it's going to have on me. I'm trying to decide whether I should accept this order or not, which is often the case in a question. And if I'm trying to dabble with whether I should accept something or not, I shouldn't be worried about what my P&L is going to look like. I should be worried about what's the actual cash outcome. Because the P&L might suggest that it's profitable, but we very well know that what the P&L shows us is not necessarily the cash position. And I don't want to be profitable on my income statement, but negative on my cash flow. That's not a sustainable business. All right? If you could be constantly investing in capital infrastructure, and hence, because of the depreciation charges, your P&L is looking better than it would be. But really, you're just deferring your losses and your costs, and your profits are looking good. So we move away from P&L, and we're thinking cash flow. What is the best financial outcome on a cash flow situation for me in this situation?
Do we consider just purely cash flows or net cash flows?
What's the difference?
Isn't net essentially what's the upside of the profit? Because I buy a machine or a part, it's going to generate X amount of cash flows from producing an output that I can sell, but I'm going to have to maintain it. I'm going to have to do a number of things to it. So
Yeah, I don't want to go there because that's building on. I'm just trying to speak about the principle, okay, and not expand on all the flesh that can be built around that. So obviously, a lot of flesh can be built around that scenario, and then you need to think what's incremental. What am I gaining? What's the net financial situation of it? So when you say should we consider net, of course you should think of what incomes are coming because of this part and whatever. You can't just look at the cost. You'll never make any decisions. Yeah, and then when we look at the material, they say there are different scenarios you need to be able to navigate around. And if you look at your syllabus, so they talk about being able to deal with make or buy decisions, all right? And shut down, accept or reject orders, which is kind of what we spoke about very lightly. Should we do extra shifts? Should we further process this product? All of those effectively and essentially are applying the same principles. And in my mind, I don't typically see all those types of things as different segments of your syllabus, and that you need to apply different understandings and thinking towards. As long as you understand those key underlying concepts, no matter whether it's a make or buy decision, in other words, should I source this from someone else, or should I manufacture it in-house? Or it's a order acceptance decision, i.e. it's a short-term, it's a once-off order that I've gotten, and it's probably going to be maybe it's outside of my normal course of business. So there's going to be some activity around that. Should I undertake it? Whether it's shutting down a line, or whatever it might be, further processing, all you got to look at is what are the extra cash flows, the relevant incremental flows in and out, and apply that thinking and see what is the best situation, with the assumption that we are looking for the best financial outcome. Right? That's what underlies short-term decision making. Now, one of the ones that's in your syllabus is shutting down a plant. So my question is, if we think a bit contextually, does that sound like a short-term decision? And should we be applying like that type of thoughts against such a type of decision? Okay, and it doesn't feel like one, and it really isn't. And so it shouldn't be thought of as such. Okay. So if we want to shut down a line, there's a lot of things that are happening around that. There's possible retrenchment costs, which might not necessarily be given to us in a question, or we might not be thinking about. But retrenchment costs is a massive like undergoing for business, getting the legal experts in, navigating through it, impact on morale, all these types of things that would happen during a retrenchment process. So that's there's got a lot of long-term connotations to that. Cutting down a line as well, and let's assume as well we lose a product line because we've stopped that line. You know, what is that doing to our market? There's long-term implications of that. What happens if when we, like our red in our black label, if we just cut out red, suddenly there's no anchor in our products because there's nothing for someone to say, oh, red's kind of like the economy price, but black's the more premium. Once we cut out red, black just becomes black label, and there's nothing to anchor us in terms of perceived value. There's a lot of considerations when you're cutting out a line. Are they, if you sell shoe polish and shoes, if you cut out your shoe sales, what does that mean for your shoe polish business, right? That's a silly example, but it's just kind of explaining how how products complement one another, and sometimes need to be sold together in a market where the one might not be making a profit. However, you need that loss leader almost to push your other profitable products and make your organization profitable. So a lot of these things come into play when we're talking about shutting down a production line. So I don't like to think of it as a short-term decision, but in context of those fundamental principles, we'd want to understand what are the cash flow impacts of cutting off that line, and would it put us in plus or negative territory? Any questions so far? Never. Sorry, which scenario? Ah, yes. How would what? What do you mean? Is that a sentence you're reading? Is this incremental? Not. So just cross out the words to my decision, first of all. Okay. So if I'm going out on this date and I'm going to pay cash, I want to pay for my meal, is that an incremental cost I would have incurred had I not gone out on the date? All right. So from the status quo where I sit and what I want to do, what is changing? What is the incremental movement, either in a plus or in a negative? Yeah. She's going, okay, I'll come out. The guy pays. There you go. Irrelevant for decision making. I just want to talk about absorbed fixed overheads, all right? Because we've spoken about absorption costing a lot and activity-based costing and whatever. So let's think of the principles of absorption of overheads, especially of fixed overheads specifically. So fixed overheads, assuming we're working in the relevant range now, they don't change within that time frame. We know we allocate them as we produce more products. Agreed? So as we produce, we're allocating those overheads because we said this is our allocation rate. Now, we have a potential to produce more products because there's a special order. I know as I produce those products, my direct costs are going to increase. Agreed? All right? Because direct cost for every one that I manufacture, there's a one-to-one relationship with the cost. What about my overhead allocation? Do I consider that as a cost for relevant costing for the short-term decision? Or do I consider that, is that irrelevant? You're nodding, is that yes, it's irrelevant or yes, it's relevant? Yes, it's relevant. Explain to me why. The fixed overhead absorption. Oh, sorry. So you thought I'm talking about direct costs. Okay, direct costs are relevant, correct? What about your absorbed fixed overheads? I want to ask you. So, can I put us in context again? Fixed overhead allocation, what is it? At the beginning of the year, we budgeted certain fixed overheads. We're working within the relevant range, which means they're not changing. And examples of that are our rent, our salary structure, things like that. We got to a rate that we said every time we produce one product, we're going to allocate a certain value to that product as a fixed overhead absorption. So we said we think we're going to produce 80,000, so we're going to allocate 8 rand to each product we produce. Now a special order comes along. Right? We know the direct costs are relevant. They link directly one-on-one basis. That fixed overhead absorption of 8 rand that we would have allocated to any other product that we produce, is it relevant for the decision making within the relevant range? It would be, it's not relevant. That's a good way to confuse a marker. Hold on. You confused. Okay, speak to me. What's going through your mind? Yes, that's what I'm asking. Why? They're not relevant. Why? Okay, they're not going to move. We've incurred them anyway. But if I asked you that overhead absorption, that 8 rand per product, is that relevant or not? Junior, are they relevant or not? That absorption. Not sure. What are you thinking? Like, what's your thought process? It depends whether the cost is going to change with the quantity. All right. So let me give you the scenario again because I'm playing on words. So I want you guys to be attentive to what I'm saying. We have we have fixed costs. All right. At the beginning of the year, we knew we were going to incur rent and salaries. That's our fixed cost overhead. We said we're going to allocate them for simplicity's sake on units produced. And our absorption rate came to 8 Rand per unit. Okay, when we allocated that, what was the denominator in that calculation? There's a word for that denominator. Normal capacity, right? In the absence of normal capacity, budgeted information. Right, so at the bottom there we had normal capacity. Normal capacity is the expected volume we're going to produce in our normal runs, production runs over a number of years that we've been able to analyze. All right, so this is what we normally make. So we got to 8 Rand per unit. Now, so we're in the middle of the year and we've produced some units and we've got still some units to go. But out of nowhere, we get this order that's not part of our normal business, but it's going to require some resources and it's going to require some odd customizations. But it's still going to go through the process, which all other products go to for 80% of the time. Do I take that 8 Rand and absorb it against that product? And account for that 8 Rand when I'm trying to understand what's relevant or not, and account for that 8 Rand when I'm trying to say yes or no. You'd say no. Okay, why? All right, so because it's, so when you put it, when we take a fixed cost, all right, and we bring it down to allocated over absorption rate or absorption rate, 8 Rand per unit. Does that mean our fixed costs increase as the more products we produce? Give me responses, guys, everyone. No, okay? No, wait, we'll get. So that, because now I'm saying 8 Rand per unit is my allocation rate. That is a mathematical thing we're doing. It's a management accountant thing we're doing to understand how our products are absorbing costs, all right? To help us make longer term decisions. We spoke about that when we were doing this, all right? To when we go into moving to the ABC area, how to restructure activities to try and minimize those fixed costs over the medium and long term, all right? But just because I'm expressing it as a per unit basis does not mean my fixed costs are moving every time I produce another unit. Okay? So, because I have an 8 Rand absorption rate per unit, does not mean now that I'm producing another 500 more than expected, on my accounting, on my P&L, I'll absorb them. But for short-term decision making, so listen to that, I will absorb them for my P&L, for purposes of the P&L, according to IFRS. Okay? But for the purposes of short-term decision making and trying to decipher whether this is relevant or not, the 8 Rand is relevant or not, it's irrelevant, because what we really are talking about is the fixed cost pool. And I said we're working within the relevant range to confuse you. And what I was saying when I said we're working in the relevant range just means that fixed cost is not going to change. Junior. Okay. Yeah. Completely. So Junior asked, he understands everything I've said. However, if we had to get new space for this new product that we're trying to do, that would be relevant, right? And the answer is yes. Because now you're incurring new cash flows. They're incremental to what you the situation you were in before this proposal came your way. And because they're incremental, regardless of the fact that they're fixed in nature, Chapter 1, Nature of Costs, or Lecture 1, Nature of Costs, does not mean they're irrelevant for decision making, because in this case, they're incremental and they're cash flow, and hence relevant. Good, well done. Are you on board? Totally. Okay, so when I say fixed costs are within the relevant range, I'm not saying they're relevant for short-term decision making. Okay, when we spoke about relevant range, we're talking about CVP. Do you guys remember that? And one of the assumptions of CVP is everything, all the costs are within the relevant range, and what that means is they don't change within that range. So you can't perform CVP without that underlying assumption. All right? So saying fixed costs are in the relevant range actually means fixed costs will not change. They're not saying they're relevant for short-term decision making. Tabani and Asan. All right, thank you. All right. Also, head office allocation. So often there's a shared service division within a business or something like that, and they'll have different units, and the head office will recover their costs by sending over allocations to each of its divisions. So they'll say for the shared services function, which includes collecting, calling up debtors, payments of creditors, etc., accounting services, customer care services, all those types of things, we're going to charge you 100,000 Rand a month. Okay? That is accounting type entry within the wider organization. It's not going to impact the cash flow of that business, whether I take this project or not. And maybe because my allocations increased, again, doesn't mean I'm actually incurring more cost on an organization level, unless another person needs to be hired. Okay? Then there's a tangible incremental cost. All right? There's some words like sunk costs. Do you guys know what that is? All right, already paid. And some example of that can often be a fixed cost. So when you bought a machine, you paid for it. It's in the past. All right. What happens if a short-term decision scenario is placed in front of me, and an example of this, or what the scenario is that there's a tender on the table. But I had to pay this guy 20,000 Rand just to present the tender to me. And I know I'm going to be the guaranteed winner, all right, because I've paid this 20,000 Rand. But I can still accept or reject it, all right? Is that 20,000 Rand relevant for this project or irrelevant? Okay, what? Relevant. Did you say relevant? Irrelevant. Irrelevant. Okay, who thinks it's relevant or might be thinking it's relevant? So we can discuss it. All right, everyone agrees it's irrelevant. And think of the timeline. Where am I standing, okay? If I'm standing at the point where I haven't paid that 20,000 Rand yet, and I'm trying to decide whether I should do this or not, that cost would in fact be relevant. If I'm making the decision at that point, if I haven't paid it yet. Yeah, imagine I just got a phone call and says, listen, I've got a tender, you will win it. You just got to give me 20,000 Rand, I'll come bring you the contract. All right? However, if at the point I've paid the 20,000 Rand, the guy comes and now we're having a meeting and now I'm assessing my options, that 20,000 Rand is in fact irrelevant. It's behind me. Whether I take it or not, that 20,000 Rand is gone. All right? So to help close that logic up, assume once I saw the contract, I realized this contract is actually loss making to my business. Would you make a decision to undertake that contract? No. So should your 20,000 Rand that you paid be a deciding factor as to whether you should take this contract or not? All right? Again, humans are irrational, so we're like, crap, I already paid 20,000 Rand. I'm halfway in this. I should carry on. But now that you've paid that money and it's behind you, and you can still go A or B, and there's nothing you can do about that 20,000 Rand, it's actually irrelevant. It's a sunk cost. All right? What about the exact same scenario, except I had to sign an agreement with that guy. So before meeting him, I had to sign an agreement and say, upon meeting you, I'm going to pay you 20,000 Rand. Or upon making a decision, upon making a decision, I'm going to pay you 20,000 Rand. Whether it's a yes or a no. All right? Is that relevant or irrelevant? Irrelevant? Why? All right. One of the principles is because regardless if you go A or B, so it's kind of got that fixed cost. It's not incremental. Agreed? All right. Let me just say that scenario again. You signed a contract to pay 20,000 Rand to meet him, and I didn't say whether you took it or not. What would you have said to me? But I haven't paid it, so it's not signed.
But you signed it. Yeah.
All right. Ahmed said the right words. He says you've committed to pay it. So committed costs, in the same vein, are irrelevant. Okay? So I made it very specific to this situation where we've committed to it. But the same principles underlie your rental agreements. Okay? So, or your installment sales agreements over your vehicles and your machinery and whatever it might be. These are all committed contractual costs. So the fact that the cash hasn't been paid now, still, as you guys will better know than me, is a future liability, right? And hence, regardless of whatever I do, I'm going to have to pay out that money. And hence, is irrelevant. It's not incremental to this decision. Yep. Yeah. And can you give me what happens if I don't get the contract? Or is it more about the fact that I've signed to pay the 20,000 rand? Is there any way out of that 20,000 rand? So he says you have to pay to me in the future. Okay, agreed. And if you get the contract, you have to pay it to me. And if you don't get the contract, you have to pay it to me. You, and if you don't, okay, it's incremental. All right. It's depending on whether I get the contract, whether I decide to go with it or not. Okay, so then it becomes relevant, a relevant cash flow. All right. So, and that sounds tricky or funny, but say you signed a contract, so you were committed, but you're not committed if you don't take it. Okay, so then it's irrelevant. I mean, it's relevant. It's relevant. Junior. Yeah. 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 So I think what's missing from what you're asking me is like it's a link to a decision, all right? So what is the science of short-term decision making? It's a calculation that you're doing aside from your normal processes, and you try and understand, is this the best financial outcome for me, all right? And non-financial, mind you, but firstly financial on the one leg. So if we look at the financial side, you're asking yourself, is this cost relevant? If it's relevant, this card, do I need it for this decision? And that's really where the crux comes. It needs to be linked to some kind of decision. If you're just talking about buying a car in the future, we're not even talking about the same. We're on different planets because you're talking more about cash flow forecasting. I'm not talking about cash flow forecasting. I'm talking about deciding whether, how to calculate whether you're going to get the best financial outcome. And in that calculation, you may only include relevant cash flows. Does that answer your question? Cool. Mark? Okay, so again, let's assume we're only talking the short term, because just in your scenario, there's a lot of long-term context here. But let's just assume we're only thinking in the short term. Um, are you saying you're going to close all other operations? So you can totally close this operation down and move over into the new factory. And you're going to produce what you used to produce in the same factory.
Doesn't necessarily have to be anything else, but the decision is to move out of that premises to a specific different one in order to sort of produce more, but you can be doing it in the one.
Okay, I think we're veering into, or we're slowly leading into like a dark space. And now I want to talk about what is long-term decision making. Do you guys know how to do long-term decision making? Hey? Yes? Wow. What is it called? Whack. It's whack. All right. So what short-term decision making is effectively the short-term version of your discounted cash flows. All right. So you guys have already done finance, your finance modules, and discounted cash flows is effectively decision making. Right. So don't you think relevancy principles in discounted cash flows? Sorry. Maintainable earnings, like, do I need a new premises? Do I put in if it's in the same premises, all these types of things, you don't include it. So you're applying the same relevancy principles. Okay, so what's the difference between short term and long term then? Or like where's kind of the cutoff? All right, on a discounted cash flow, there's a bit of a thinking that over the medium to long term, fixed costs can be adjusted and changed and planned differently. So therefore, where relevant must be taken into account and considered. All right, but where's the cutoff between where you draw the line? What's short term? When am I thinking short term? When am I thinking long term? Okay, we talk about 12 months. Why do we talk about 12 months? Okay, typically 12 months would fall within your operating cycle. All right, that's a very good answer. What's the academic answer? All right, foreseeable future type of thing. No. Yeah. No. All right, so time value of money, right? So why in our discounted cash flow we take into account the effects of time value of money? When we do that WACC calculation, embedded in there is risk and everything, but also embedded in there is the fact that your money loses value over time. All right? So if 12 months is considered a period, roughly, where time value of money is irrelevant. We know that's not strictly true, because we know even within 6 months, 100 rands on buy me less petrol, actually in 3 days, let alone 6 months. And it's going to buy me less bread and less beer and whatever and whatever. I keep on talking about beer, I sound terrible. Whatever. Good stuff. Carrots and vegetables. All right, so we know even within 6 months can change. But as a way of practice, to go and sit and calculate inflation effects or within 12 months becomes impracticable, right? Impractical. What's that word again? Oh, there's an accounting word. Impracticable. Is it impracticable? And so we say within a 12-month period, the effects of inflation and real growth within prices don't come into play. And because we're playing within that range, we're sitting within the short term. That's why when you move over into discounted cash flows and you're doing all your WACC calculations and all of that, now you take into account, say, it's gone past the period where I can ignore the fact that my 1 rand now is not the same for my 1 rand later. When you go past that, you can't say that anymore. You need to consider it. And then the same thing, the same kind of discussions happen around fixed costs, where we know in the immediate term, there's nothing I can do right now with regards to my fixed costs. So as a general rule, I just proved to you that it's not always true. As a general rule, I don't take them into account for short-term decision making. So why I brought that up based on what Mark said is, don't try to apply short-term decision-making principles to every scenario that exists on the planet, all right? They won't always fall within that. It's not logical to try squeeze something. Even what Junior was asking about buying a car in 3 years. It's not logical to squeeze that into a short-term decision. A short-term decision is literally saying that you need to make a call now and it'll probably impact you over the next 1 or 2 or 3 months. And when placed in that situation, the underlying assumption is that you're going to maximize profits. And there's other assumptions with that as well, that you can maximize profit to Bunny without all other things happening, okay, without destroying your business, without impacting your normal trade and business as usual. All right, and that brings us, that's where we sit when we talk about short-term decision making. Great. So I think I've said everything I want to say about short-term decision making. We're going to go through some examples of types of short-term decisions and very basic calculations just to get us into the flavor of making those decisions. But before we go there, we should talk about material costs. So you've seen this, the relevant cost of materials, and it's, or you might have seen it differently, whatever, but basically you've seen the same thing. Please don't all write this down. All right, you can grab the slides or whatever, but it's not a complex thing. What I want to walk you guys through is saying this is actually a totally logical flow just mapped out. So if you try parrot fashion this in the stress of a question, and in the moment, you're going to freak out because you can't remember the map and what goes where. But if you just understand what's kind of been said to you, it's pretty straightforward. So the context of this type of diagram is we've been asked to produce a certain new product. It's a custom-made order. It's once off. Should I do it? Should I not? Short-term decision. It impacts me in the short term. And I need to understand how I should account for the materials that go into this product. Okay. So if I have the stock on hand and it costs me 5 Rand per kilo, all right, and I need 3 kilos, how much must I take into account as a relevant cost? I have the stock on hand. I've already paid for it. I must include 15 Rand. But it's sunk. I've already incurred it. All right, good. We need to, I don't have enough information to give you an answer yet. You guys need to ask me questions. What do you want to ask me, Adila? No, you're gonna ask. Don't you want to ask me some questions about this material? Okay. In academic words, there's an alternative market for it, but in more simple layman's terms, am I going to use it for something else? All right. So let me say yes, Patrick. Is that enough information, or do you want to ask me more questions? All right. It's still academic. All right. Can I use it for something else, those raw materials? My answer is yes. I'm going to use it to produce the stuff that I normally produce. If I had to buy it again, it'll be 16 Rand now. Okay, so I have 15 Rand in stock and I need to apply to this new order. And I currently use this stuff for the stock that I usually produce. And if I had to buy another 3 kilos, it would now cost me 16 Rand. How much would I earn in my normal, the new order? All right. I'm not going to answer that because I want to understand the relevant cost of the material. So that's leading down. And you bring in the whole calculation. I just want to know about the cost of the material. Tyron? Do you know how much should I include in my calculation for the relevant cost of material? R0, 15 Rand, or 16 Rand? 15, why? Calvin? How much should I include? R15? I've got some 16s. I've got some 15s. I've got a 15. Nothing. Okay. So who wants to answer for the 15 club? Why? Patrick. Why $15? Because it sounded like the right thing to say. Well, 15 Rand's what we historically paid to buy that stuff. All right, that's what we technically have incurred to produce this special order, 15 Rand. Okay, 16 Rand club. No, not Mark. Yeah, sorry. All right, so the word replace. You've heard of replacement cost. You guys remember that? Okay, so the argument there is we're going to have to take that stock. We're applying it against this special order, but we know we need that stock for our normal production, and it's going to cost us 16 Rand to replenish that stock for normal production. That's the argument there. Patrick, what's your response to that? No, you said 15 Rand, and you said because you've already incurred 15 Rand. 15 Rand is what you paid for it. But if you had to go out and buy more now, so your answer was 16 Rand. All right. Who's in the 15 Rand club? Okay, what's your response to that? You've been swayed. All right. No, that's. Yeah, I think that's a cultural thing coming out here. Like the relevant costing's 8 Rand. Where did 8 Rand come from? Like, half price. Do you agree, Tyler, that it's 16 Rand? Do you understand? Why? Explain to me why it's 16 Rand. Yikes. Guys, what's going on here? It's a Monday. All right, does everyone understand why it's 16 Rand? Let's speak about it if not. Okay, the table explains it, but imagine you didn't have the table in front of you. And that's the whole point that I'm saying. Like, you sitting there in your exam chair, and now you have to kind of figure out this information. Why is it 15? Why is it 16? Why is it not 0? Yes. To the special order. All right, perfect. So because we have that stock on hand, technically it's sunk. So if we want to try debate, we can say, oh, that money's sunk. But however, we know we need that raw material for our normal production. However, I paid 15 Rand for it in the past, but to replenish that stock, to continue and honor all my other obligations, I need to pay 16 Rand for the new raw material. And hence 16 Rand was relevant for my short-term decision, okay? So if we look at that chart, it's in stock, it's used regularly, it needs to be replaced, current replacement cost. And we've logically walked through that. That's what I'm trying to say to you. Yeah.
In that scenario, what happens if there's a market for it? I mean, it's now cost you 16, right? Higher than what we bought for, but then there's an alternative market to that.
So
It could be more or less.
So not only do you have to replenish it, but you can sell it in its raw material form. Is that what you're saying? So if there's like multiple scenarios, the one that you compare that becomes part of your relevant cost that falls into your calculation, is the highest, the best option. Okay. So if your current marginal contribution of your current normal products that you produce is 20 rand, and for that things, and we said it's going to cost 16 rand to replace, we know we make $4 in our normal production. However, to sell raw material, whatever, in its raw form is a certain price. You have to just take the best option and say, what's the best option out of this? And that's the one relevant cost that I include in my calculation.
Raw material or take it into production and sell that.
Yeah. And that's a further processing. So that's like a decision within a decision, which you'll also be faced with. So you're talking about, do I process further or do I sell now? So first you answer that decision, and then you move into this kind of flow. But you're complicating it, all right? So if I ask you how much I've got 3 kilograms in stock, it costs me 15 rand, but I have no other use for it. What is the relevant cost? All right? NRV, what can I sell it for? Yeah, there's certain information. I can't leave you at it's in stock. There's not enough information for you to understand what the relevant cost is. If I tell you it's in stock and we use it in our regular production, you know you need to replace it. If I say we can't use it for anywhere else, well, then it becomes the resale value. And kind of a side one to that is there's no resale value, then the relevant cost is zero. Nobody wants it in its raw material form. It's useless. The relevant cost is zero. So the net realizable value of that is zero. Okay? And then lastly, there's the scarce resource. And that gets us to our next little bit. But your scarce resource means if I have to take those 3 kilograms, apply them to the special order, but it means I can't produce my normal production now because I no longer have that raw material. Okay? The relevant cost is the amount of profit I've lost out on, that 4 rand. 20 minus the 13. Yeah, the 16. Does everyone understand that? So you don't need to map this, know this off by heart, go parrot study it. Just understand why it is this way, and you can lead yourself down that path every single time, just pretty logically and intuitively. The easiest scenario is it's not in stock. Then what? Then we just go out and buy it, all right? If it's not in stock, we have to go and buy it. All right, let's have a 10-minute break. So just a word on limiting factor analysis. The one thing that could be a limiting factor is demand. So that's pretty straightforward and easy, which means you're only going to produce up until demand, and that's where you're going to stop. All right? That's how you're going to maximize your contribution. But then the other area where the limit might be is in one of your resources, and that could be a raw material, it could be your labor, it could be anything else that's a resource that goes into producing or building up this product, and that's where the other side sits. And to get there, as we said, you use a contribution per limiting factor to decide if you have an option between product A and B, which products should I use in situations of constraint. All right. So we're very close to the end, and then there's just a bit of like homework, which I'm going to let you guys do here. But what I want to wrap off with all of this that we discussed is qualitative considerations in short-term decision making. Okay. So we've spoken a lot, and we've thought about relevant costs and cash flows, and we've spoken a lot about the money side, which is the quantitative side. But it's important to note that a lot of your marks, right, and a lot of your thinking and applied thinking is expected to be done on the qualitative considerations as well. Now, we had some really good discussion around pricing earlier, and similar types of thinking, similar types of rationale, problem solving, applying yourself to the scenario should be applied when when making any short-term decision. All right. So I don't know what scenario we should use. Maybe let's use the scenario of overtime or not. So whether you should put your workers on to work overtime for a specific reason, and the numbers might say yes, let's get them to work overtime because then they can produce more and the demand is out there and we can sell it, and we maximize our current cash profitability situation, as was the underlying principle. However, let's think contextually about this, all right? So don't spew out a list of answers that you're used to seeing in your solutions, which sometimes is not a bad approach. But also think of some other things that are very real that would impact your decision if you sat in that chair, all right? So if you had a team of employees and you wanted to push them for overtime, work over the weekend, 3 weekends in a row, what is things you're going to be thinking about? Okay, productivity, brilliant. So during that weekend, are they actually going to be productive, especially by weekend number 2 or 3? Morale, all right, by the 3rd week, they're going to be irritated. Morale's going to be low. How do you lift them up? How do you make them feel better? As morale drops, productivity also drops with it, and all your other productions are going to be impacted. Okay, can they impact on the output because they're now really tired? They don't really care anymore by, again, weekend 2 or 3, especially on the Sunday. They're just like, whatever, and letting things slide through, so your quality drops. All right, so the extra rate, let's assume we covered that in our quantitative analysis. Okay, could we get unions involved? Because there's no right answer. I don't have a list of correct answers here in my head. What I just want you guys to do is to be able to think critically of a situation and be very real. Think of the context of our country. Think of the context of if you had your own business, and what would you be considering? What are the pressures you'd be feeling? It's not one-way pressure in a business. There's all types of things that are happening. And so be able to flush out those considerations. Also, look at the question. The question will sometimes hint other things that might apply to some of the other scenarios, but then you need to be able to layer that all together and talk about what's happening in the question and what's relevant to that decision in context of the company that they've told you about, in context of the scenario that this entity is operating in, and the environment it's operating, and the scenario that they've presented to you. So don't be numb, don't be black and white. Think contextually, think as a manager. This is what the subject is about, all right? And be able to apply yourself to that. Great, so I think we've really wrapped up short-term decision making. There's a few assumptions here, but really the main underlying assumptions, assumption number 1, 2, and 3 are kind of actually linked to what we know in CVP, where we say we know what the costs are, information is complete and reliable. There's an assumption that things won't change, and we know the cost with certainty, so there's this element of working within the relevant range and things like that. So don't fuss too much about that, but I do think assumption number 1 is something that is kind of a thinking pattern you need to go into when you're faced with a short-term decision that you need to apply. Great, so that's that, and please can you guys do pages 19 through to 26 on your lecture notes. Basically, they short, simple examples of different types of short-term decisions such as whether I should buy or produce myself, whether I should use labor overtime, accept or reject an order, process further, etc., etc. These are parts of the syllabus they specifically mentioned. However, I believe any short-term decision can be framed with these. They are all framed with these principles and should be logically solved as such, and not as, oh, this is a make or buy, so this is how I must think. Really, it's one set of thinking, but different types of things that can happen. Yeah, just give me an example, second there. What did I say? 19. So it starts a few pages after where you were, and near the bottom of the page it says make or buy. Do you guys see that? So from there onwards, you just push through for the next 6 pages until you see something that says cost, volume, profit analysis. That's where you stop.